Hello everybody, King Ned Reviews here, and today we'll be talking about Witch Hat Atelier, specifically Dagda and Coustas. Dagda and Coustas quickly became one of my favorite relationships in the series, and their storyline also became one of the more thematically important storylines in the series. Dagda and Coustas were characters that barely found their happiness after years of battling through poverty, but these good times were abruptly cut short and led them into a very tragic situation. In this video, I will break down the history and the relationship behind Dagda and Custas, and then I will break down the importance of all the scenes that Dagda and Custas were a part of that created the powerful storyline. And finally, I will give my analysis on why the storyline of Custas and Dagda ended up in a tragedy. If you end up enjoying this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Also support me on Patreon for early access to videos like this one. The link is in the description down below. Now, the tragic story of Dagda and Coustas. Let's talk about it. Dagda and Coustas became very close to each other due to two main reasons. The first reason is that they both grew up in very similar living conditions and can therefore understand the pain and struggles each other went through. The second reason is that Dagda taught Custas everything he knows, and they eventually became a very loving family. Dagda was living in the mud slums for most of his life. In order to survive, he mostly resorted to stealing to keep himself fed. He gets caught by a traveling music troupe, and right when he resigns himself to death, they instead teach him how to play music and how to make a living from it. The lady from the troupe that taught him everything he knows was also from the mud slums as well and helped him due to their similar origins. It became almost like a cycle where the people that made it out the mud slums would offer aid to those that are still struggling in it. Dagda never quite understood the idea of helping others from the slums just because you were from there too. They already had more than enough stress in their lives, so why did they also have to worry about helping others? He didn't quite get it till he met a lovely young boy called Custas. Custas was in a very similar situation to Dagda. Custas lived in the mud slums as well and was always reminded that fate dealt him a very poor card, which led him to being born into poverty while others are born with much more in their lives. He barely had anything to eat and was seen catching a dirty crow for his meal. He hears Dagda's song lyrics and got inspired by its message. After that, Dagda took him and taught him his way of life. Throughout their journey, they grew together and loved each other to the point that they referred to each other as family. Dagda stated that, but now I can truly say that teaching that child music was the only worthwhile thing I've accomplished in my life. Custas is my son, not by blood, but by inheritance. Such a powerful line, and it perfectly sums up everything I love about the relationship. They both love, treasure, and respect each other while still trying to move forward from their background full of poverty and hardship. They had a stable living, a good future, and they were both happy. So, what exactly went wrong that caused their lives to spiral downwards into tragedy? Well, it all started on a stormy night when Dagda came to Team Quifri to ask for their help to save his son, Custas. Due to that storm, there were many people in dire need of help. Team Quifri helped save Custas and everyone from the storm, but unfortunately, most of the inventory they had was too hard to retrieve and had to be abandoned. Everyone was grateful that they were alive, but they were still disappointed that they lost most of their cargo. Custas and Dagda lived as minstrels who would travel around and play music for a living. Not only are they poor, so buying new instruments will really hurt their wallet, but the instruments themselves are heavily connected to their lifestyle, so losing them is a huge loss that goes beyond just monetary reasons. Knowing this, Custas ends up trying to salvage some of the instruments that were stuck nearby since they looked easy to retrieve, but instead the cliff ended up closing in and collapsing on him. Dagda starts panicking as he sees Custas hurt and tries to get the witches to help him. Dagda feels very responsible for Custas and was even prepared to go out there himself to save him regardless of the danger. In the end, Custas does end up saved, but it turns out that his leg was badly injured. The Knights of Morales, or the Witch Police, arrive to provide aid to everyone, but they claim that their magic cannot help Custas' leg. Dagda does not believe them since he just saw them revive a burnt flag out of thin air, but they blackmail him to keep quiet by threatening to leave Custas there to die instead of flying him to the hospital where he can get some first aid. Dagda values Custas' life more than he does interrogating the witches about their lackluster reasoning, so he ends up accepting their words in hopes that Custas' life can at least be saved. This scene was the foundation for Custas losing hope in witch society and eventually joining the Brimhats, because the Knights of Morales, who are the face of order in witch society, told them to their face that they cannot heal Custas. Dagda knew something was a bit off with that statement, and when he questioned it, he was blackmailed. To Custas and Dagda, this gives off a terrible impression on how Conehad witches in witch society behave when normal people need help. Since Conehad witches are the only witches that normal humans are mainly exposed to, no matter what they say or do, it is taken as a fact. There's no second opinion or a different witch society that actively shares information with normal humans. So because of that, it is incredibly easy for the current witch society to lie about many things, which as the readers we are already aware of. This scene made Custas and Dagda realize that when their life are really in danger, the highest order of the Conehead witches, aka the witch police, did not help them. This fact gets ingrained into Custas and Dagda's heads as they move forward in the story. The next time we see Custas after the accident at the river, he's in a wheelchair at the hospital and just fell down the stairs. He gets saved by Coco and Tartar, and after recognizing Coco, he gives his utmost thanks to her for saving him earlier in the river and says he owes his life to her. We see just how much Custas values Coco after she helped him move the boulder from his body to save his life. Even while suffering near permanent injuries on his legs, he's still grateful to her. In the next scene, we learn from Custas that he has been studying medicine with Tartar, which is illegal for Tartar to do. Witches are banned from studying medicine, but Custas seems to be a special enough person to Tartar that he's willing to break the laws to help him out. Through a short backstory, we learned that Custas was being harassed by some contraption thieves, but Tartar stepped in and saved him. Tartar then fixed his chair and helped him get back to his feet. With this, we now understand why Custas calls Tartar his number 2 favorite witch behind Coco. Tartar not only saved him from those thieves, but is also teaching him about herbs and how to read. Custas has a huge appreciation towards Tartar for the knowledge he's gaining in their lessons. The next scene after that is incredibly important for Custas' character. It dives deep into his history, his motivations, and his personal thoughts and feelings about his current situation. The scene presents two main ideas to the readers. The first one goes more in depth about the current situation Custas and Dagda are now living in, and it talks about what they're doing to try and get their life back on track. The second main idea is presenting a conflict between Custas, Coco, and Tartar, which will later become the catalyst of why he loses trust in them. To tackle the first message, Shirahama starts off the scene with Tartar teaching Custas about the properties of the different herbs. Coco comes in and after some small talk, Custas starts to explain his history. They learn that Custas and Dagda are minstrels, which were an older form of traveling singers or musicians who mainly recited special stories or lyrics to nobility. Unfortunately, most of the instruments they used to perform were washed away in the disaster that happened in the river earlier, and because of how expensive those instruments are to replace, that accident ended up making them lose their livelihoods. On top of how expensive the instruments are, the hospital bills Dagda now has to pay for Custas is a lot for him to handle. Custas painfully smiles while admitting that Dagda could easily go back to his life as a minstrel if he would simply abandon Custas, since only paying for the instruments without having to worry about Custas' hospital bills is very doable for someone of Dagda's caliber. However, Dagda is not that kind of man to abandon those he cares about. Shirahama later emphasizes this part of the relationship by showing Dagda coming home very hurt and bloodied. Custas starts to panic and tells Dagda to stop doing such dangerous work. Custas feels very worried about Dagda, and he also probably feels very guilty about putting him in this situation, but Dagda says the money is too good to turn down. Risking his life to sustain his family is a burden he's willing to carry. While crying on his shoulder, Custas begs for him to stop and rhetorically asks Dagda why he's risking his precious life for someone like him. Custas continues to tell Dagda that he should just abandon him, leave town, and go enjoy his life. He begs him again and again, while they both hug each other quietly and letting their feelings out. This is the first time we get a strong major red flag hinting towards the future tragedy. Dagda was very capable of replacing those instruments that they lost within just a few months. It would just take a lot of effort, but it was definitely possible for someone used to living in the slums. Custas, who was only trying to protect their current lifestyle, accidentally made their entire situation worse by getting hurt. This heavily increased the financial burden on Dagda. Paying for just the hospital bills or just the expensive instruments by themselves was very possible for Dagda, but paying for both of them at the same time was well above his means. As Custas pointed out, Dagda could easily leave him behind if he wanted to, but instead Dagda chose to take care of Custas and protect their lifestyle as minstrels. To do this, however, Dagda has to take on very dangerous work that clearly put his life at risk. Coustas doesn't want to be the reason why Dagda dies and is willing to have Dagda abandon him as long as Dagda can stay alive and enjoy his life. Dagda doesn't want to see Coustas die by suffering alone with his disability, so he's willing to risk his life to protect him. These are two people who never had much to begin with, and even though they were on the verge of having a happy future together, one mistake on that river caused everything to spiral downwards. However, Dagda is not the only person that Coustas cares for in his life. Coco and Tartar are people he considers very close friends, and the next scene presents a conflict that will forever complicate their relationship. The scene continues with Custas talking to Tartar and Coco about Dagda. Custas says he's very lucky to have someone like Dagda in his life, and even comments that Dagda might be treating him too nicely since they aren't related biologically. Despite that, Dagda is still sacrificing so much for Custas, even though it wasn't his fault that Custas got injured and can't perform anymore. Custas says he wants to lessen Dagda's burden as much as possible and is currently studying herbs so he can sell them and make money. Arthur sees Custas' excitement about making money selling herbs and reminds him that reading in general is powerful and opens doors to the future for well paying jobs. Custas reminds him that he is in no position to think too deeply about the future since they need money now. And unlike witches, whose future are most likely guaranteed to be better than the average person, he doesn't have the luxury that the witch status brings and therefore has to fight tooth and nail just for daily survival. Coco tries to cheer him up by saying there's hope for everyone, since she was also someone born poor without any means of advancing in society. But she comes off as very insensitive since Custas believes she was born a witch. No one but Coco herself knows that she can truly relate to people without magic, and having someone born with everything Custas wanted, trying to tell him that there's hope for someone like him who wasn't born privileged like they were, really put Custas in a bad mood. He snaps and sarcastically agrees, saying that if he had a house, if he had school, if he had no worries about food or money, and if he had magic, of course he'd be just like Coco. But since he wasn't born fortunate enough, he has to suffer all the pain the world is throwing at him while stuck with his brittle legs of wood. This scene was powerful because as the reader, we know that Coco and Custas wasn't that much different from each other. Coco never lived a luxurious life or had any formal education. She was in a single parent household and was helping her mom put food on the table with their small family business. Coco had her mom in her life and Custas had Dagda. Both of their families did what they could to keep their lives stable, but Coco and Custas still yearned for magic. Magic could improve and help them enjoy their lives more, but they were both told that they could never obtain it due to their births. Coco, however, got lucky and gained access to magic, which is practically impossible and unprecedented from what we've seen so far. But since she has to lie about her situation to follow the rules, Custas can only see her as just another spoiled witch girl that lived an easy life with very little worries. Coco has to choose between being honest with her close friend who trusts her or following the rules and keeping him in the dark since he was not born in witch society. This situation created an unnecessary distance between Custas and his friends and would later lead to heavy trust issues. Everything that happened to Custas and Dagda so far leads up to the biggest turning point in the series, Chapter 45. Chapter 45 was a big chapter and it had two main scenes. The first one is where Custas receives help from Coco and Tartar because of his damaged legs, and the second one is when he meets the Brim Hats. Chapter 45 starts off with the first major scene where Tartar and Coco present their newly finished spell to Custas to help him move around easier. They tell him it can't fix his legs, but it will aid him in transportation. Custas uses the tool and we see him very happy to take flight for the first time. He is having the time of his life and shows his appreciation for Tartar and Coco. Dagda comes in and thoroughly thanks Coco for bringing a genuine smile on Custas' face again. Custas then flies to Dagda and shares his happiness with him. He starts writing the names of his friends since he has been practicing his writing, And then he apologizes to Coco for taking his anger out on her and says Coco didn't ask to be born a witch, so he shouldn't be mad at her. The scene ends with Coco realizing once again how heavy her lies are warping what Custas thinks about her origin story, and Tartar realizing that a big part of him wanted to teach Custas magic to properly help him overcome his struggles instead of just giving him a good magic tool. But at the end of the day, they both decided to keep quiet and follow the Witch Society rules. This scene continues to emphasize how Custas will express deep gratitude for his favorite witches, and they're forced to lie to him and not help him to the best of their ability because they must follow the rules of witch society. This is a painful situation because Tartar and Coco genuinely want to help him, and we see how serious they are about it. But unfortunately, that doesn't change the fact that they were hiding many things from one of their closest friends who values them very highly. This disconnect between Custas and the young witches will eventually blow up in their faces and lead to huge complications in their relationship. We then move on to the most important event in this tragic tale of Custas and Dagda, and that is meeting the Brimhats. The scene starts off with Custas, who cannot travel due to Coco and Tartar's magic tool. While on the road, Custas asks Dagda if they can go to the Silver Night Festival to repay Coco and Tartar for all that they've done. Dagda agrees, but then the bandits attack. The bandits say Dagda's been attacking them and stealing their loot, so they're here for revenge. The bandits also threaten to rob Custas and sell him on the black market. Dagda realizes that the situation is very dangerous and forces Custas to fly away while he handles the bandits himself. The fighting ends and we see Dagda's dying body while Custas is crying on top of it. A brimhat witch called the Nia Nia shows up and offers to heal Dagda since it looked like he needed help. Custas doesn't believe it because he was told that witches can't heal people. But the Nia Nia tells him that what he's been told by the witches is all a lie and proves it by healing Dagda right in front of his face. The scene ends with Nia Nia offering to heal Custas, and it is implied that she took him into the group and he was taught many different things about magic and witch society. Every scene we've experienced so far with Custas and Dagda up until this point has built up to him forsaking the witch society and turning towards the Brimhats. The Brimhats are an unknown group, but we know that they are treated as terrorists by witch society, and associating with them will lead to the entire world of magic being against you. Custas joining their group will bring a lot of trouble in the future, but the Brimhat witches still treated Custas in a way that perfectly aligned with his wants and needs, unlike the other witches he has seen before. The first major thing the Brimhats did was save Dagda. We have had many scenes up to this point showing just how much Custas loved Dagda, so Dagda being saved from death will make the Brimhats forever have his gratitude. What made this scene extra special is that the Conhad witches already refused to use magic to help the group back in the Staircase River, but the Brimhad witches offered their help without asking for anything in return. What made it even worse was that the Brimhats exposed to Custas that the Conhad witches could have healed them all along, but they just didn't want to because it was against their rules. Those same rules that the Brimhats didn't bother following and ended up saving Custas and Dagda. The Brimhats even went the extra mile and offered their help to heal Custas' legs without him even asking for it. Throughout the series, Custas has received a lot of help from many people, especially from Coco and Tartar. We repeatedly saw his gratitude towards them for helping him get out of the storm by the river, for saving him from the thieves, for teaching him about herbs and how to write, and finally for giving him a magic tool to help with transportation. Despite everything they've done for him, they still didn't directly solve his problems like the Brimhats did. The level of help he received from the Brimhats solved all his current problems and gave him the opportunity to completely transform his life for the better. Thanks to them, he can now walk again. Dagda and his life has been saved from death, and he now has the knowledge of magic and the knowledge of witch society, which gives him a huge opportunity to really make a difference in the world. The Brimhats helping Custas more doesn't exactly mean he should turn on his friends who still care about him, but unfortunately, Custas learning about the rules of magic society means that he now understands that this whole time, Tartar and Coco were continuously lying to him. They were hiding knowledge that could have helped him, and unlike the Brimhats, Coco and Tartar prioritized following the rules of the society over helping him and Dagda. He felt betrayed since a lot of the pain he went through since he got hurt by the river could have been avoided if his favorite witches decided to break the rules and did everything in their power to help him. This was a huge turning point in his life because he now lost everything. He lost trust in witch society that always told him he couldn't use magic. He now has to deal with Dagda's inevitable death, when the magic runs out, and he also lost trust in his favorite witch friends who has been hiding all the facts from him. Custas was never a boy with many things. All he had was Dagda, his friends, and belief in the world, but all that got stripped away at once. He has nothing left to fall back on but the Brimhats who helped him and exposed the lies he grew up believing. Despite the Brimhats helping Custas, we are still unsure if they genuinely care for him the way Coco and Tartar does, and associating with the Brimhats will still ruin any hope of a humble future for Custas, since he will now have a big target on his back from the witch police. The next few scenes reiterate Custas' current feelings and the complicated relationships he began to have with Coco, Tartar, and the witch society in general. Custas eventually meets Coco and Tartar, who notice his new legs. He fake smiles at Tartar and Coco and explains to them that he has new magical legs that can move and grow at his own will. Tartar and Coco tried to explain themselves on why they couldn't teach him or use forbidden magic, but Custas was too enraged at their excuses to listen properly. He asks why it's wrong for him to learn magic, and asks why it's dangerous and forbidden for him to use magic to heal his legs, when humans are allowed to use other dangerous tools like fire and knives all the time. He continues to ask who has the right to decide who can and can't learn magic, and comes to the conclusion that all witches are liars. Coco and Tartar admit that they were guilty of lying, but still claim that their feelings of wanting to help Custas wasn't fake. They were already breaking laws by teaching him about the herbs, and they said they truly wanted to help him out of his situation. Custas says for him to believe them, they will have to show it with their actions, and Nia then puts a bracelet on Coco and Tartar, which will put a magic tattoo on them if they don't listen to what they have to say. Custas then says that they will help him and then Nia break the shitty cage of fate. This scene emphasized that Custas has completely accepted the Brimhats and is on a mission to change the witch society, which has always lied to him. We see that he chose his new friend and Nia over Coco and Tartar, and it isn't surprising based on all the scenes that led up to this point. Committing to the Brimhats is very risky, and it may not lead to real happiness since it can cause many problems in the future, but despite everything, Custas still chose to walk down this thorny path in hopes for a better life. After getting Custas' point of view on the situation, we then move over to Dagda's. We see Dagda meet up with Coco and Tartar, who were about to reach the mudslums. He explains it isn't safe because the mudslums is a place where all the sludge, abandoned water, and abandoned people gather. It was the same kind of place that Dagda and Custas used to call home. He tells Coco and Tartar about his backstory and offers to play them a song, but before he could start, they see a magic tattoo on his body. He sings them a song, but notices they weren't really happy. He asks them why they aren't enjoying the song, and they ask him about the tattoo on his body and his instrument. He says he has no clue what happened, and woke up with both his tattoo on his body and tattoo on his instrument already there. He remembers he's looking for Custas, but shortly gets attacked by the magic police. While fighting, Coco tells him that he's getting attacked because of the tattoo on his body. During the fight, Dagda starts coughing out blood, and we learn that the time glyph seal on his body and instrument only lasts for 1 day. Custas comes in and fixes the time glyph seal. Everyone slowly realizes that Dagda dies and revives every day, and without continuously fixing that time glyph seal, he will inevitably perish. This scene was heartbreaking because we learned that even with the available magic, it is too late for Dagda. The best they can do is stall Dagda's inevitable death, which is still illegal to do, raises a lot of ethical questions, and requires constant maintenance. The scene also emphasized how strict and inflexible the witch society is with its rules, because we see how they wouldn't even listen to what Dagda has to say and immediately attacked him without asking any questions. We also see how panicked and scared Custas was when he was redoing the seal on Dagda. He's clearly scared to lose the most important person in his life, but he probably also understands that his death is inevitable and he might not be able to stall it forever. So why must Dagda and Custas go through such a tragic situation? What did they do that caused all of this to happen? And it's honestly just a series of misfortunate events that led to the worst possible scenario. There were a few factors that made the story so heartbreaking, and the main catalyst for this whole situation was Custas getting hurt. Technically, Custas was not supposed to go fetch those instruments that got swept by the storm because it was very risky and dangerous. It's easy to put the blame on him for doing something so risky and getting hurt, but Custas and Dagda both grew up in the mudslums. They didn't have anything at all but their music, and that's how they made a living. Those expensive instruments were an investment they made to eventually make a proper living for themselves off of being minstrels. Custas knew how important those instruments were to his and Dagda's lifestyle, and he didn't want Dagda to struggle to try to replace them. Those same instruments got washed away, and they looked very easy to retrieve. But because of that, Custas was tricked into believing that it was safe and got hurt instead. But a child getting hurt shouldn't mean the family's lifestyle should spiral downward to tragedy, right? Normally, that would be true, but unfortunately, Dagda grew up in the mud slums. This means that he did not have a proper education or skills to find solid opportunities to work and make a living. All he had was his instruments, and now they are gone while he's stuck with a big hospital bill for his child. Someone like Dagda, who does not have many options, will be stuck doing very dangerous work to try and make enough money to handle the payment of both Custas' hospital bills and the expensive instruments. Dagda is now in a situation where his life is in constant danger and he's doing it purely out of love for Custas. Custas only wanted to help Dagda and not burden him financially with paying for those expensive instruments, but instead, Custas ended up being the financial burden since Dagda now has to pay for his hospital bills, which caused him to constantly put his life in danger. It's easy to tell that the guilt is getting to Custas since he even asked Dagda, the most important person in his life, to abandon him and take care of himself instead. Custas got hurt because of his good intentions of wanting to aid Dagda by preventing a huge money loss that will come from paying for those instruments, and Dagda keeps getting hurt from doing dangerous jobs to pay the bills for the most important person in his life, Custas. It is a very sad situation because both parties really love each other, and due to their poor background, they were forced to make decisions that turned out devastating in the long run, even though they had pure intentions. If Custas and Dagda had a lot of money, there would be little to no reason for Custas to risk his life to get those instruments since replacing them wouldn't take much effort. It was because replacing them would take a long time due to their financial situation that Custas chose to take what he thought wasn't a big of a risk and ended up getting hurt in the process. On the other hand, if Custas and Dagda had a lot of money or just better education, paying for Custas' hospital bills would not only be far easier, but it wouldn't require Dagda to do such dangerous work to afford them. Unfortunately, life is not that easy for this loving but poor family. While struggling with his new disability, Custas receives huge help from his two favorite witches, Coco and Tartar, and finally was able to travel again due to their magic tools. Custas shows his utmost gratitude for them helping him, and now his life of Dagda finally has a chance to bounce back to the happiness they had before. Unfortunately, right when they were about to turn their life around, Dagda gets attacked by the bandits from his previous job and ends up nearly lifeless while his body is slowly dying. This situation again happens simply because Dagda wanted to provide for Custas properly and it now cost him his life. The Brim has used a time glyph seal on Dagda to keep him alive, but as stated in the story, it only lasts for one day before reverting back into his nearly lifeless body. Unless the damage from that battle is healed directly, Dagda would inevitably die if they stop reviving him with the time glyph seal. Custas is now the only member of the duo with his full life force, and the fact that you can spin the situation in a twisted way to blame him for the death of Dagda is simply heartbreaking. Custas not only has to suffer with the loss of his family, but he also has to deal with the betrayal of the two only other people besides Dagda that he cared about, Coco and Tartar. Custas believed that Coco and Tartar did everything in their power to help him because they were close friends who loved and respected each other. But the Brim has exposed that witches not only hid magic from the people who need it, but they also have ridiculous rules that serve to justify them for not helping heal people through magic. Custas realizing that Tartar and Coco were not willing to help him as much as the Brim had because of the Witch Hat Society rules, made him lose the full trust he had in them and directed him into the path of following the evil Brim Hats. Custas joined such a shady organization not just due to Dagda, Coco, and the Tartar situation, but also because of Witch Hat Society as a whole. He was a boy that believed that fate was the reason he was born with nothing. He had nothing to blame for his situation but the world and fate itself. But after the knowledge gained from the Brimhats, he realized he wasn't just born with nothing. He was always capable of magic, just like all the witches. They just hid it from him. The blame he had on the world now shifted towards the Witch Society specifically, since they were the reason he was so behind in terms of having opportunities to make it in life. Joining the Brimhats, who are against the Witch Society, was only natural for a boy in his position. The saddest thing about all this is that Custas was bound for a happy future with Dagda. They would have traveled the world, making their money and trying to live the best life they possibly could while being together. A nice and humble lifestyle. But due to him getting hurt on that specific day, Dagda ended up killed. His two best friends lost his trust, and now he joined an evil organization that goes against the entire world of witches. He now has to live a life on the run from the witch police without any family or friends. And unlike Dagda, Coco, and Tartar, we are unsure if the Brimhead witches truly care for Custas' happiness. He is stuck in a very unfortunate position that makes everything in his life very complicated. He is a boy who lost a peaceful and happy life with his family, lost trust in his only friends and the society he lives in, and now he has to live a life of vengeance against the world that wronged him. A life like that isn't one that will likely bring him true happiness, but that just goes to show how one little mistake can spiral your entire life downwards towards tragedy. There's a lot more amazing content the series has coming for Custas' storyline, so make sure you stay tuned to see how his story will play out. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to my Patreon for early access to more videos like this one. The link is in the description down below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.